What's going on, guys? Today we're going to show you how to install our universal 8-gang switch controller. We're going to pass it along to Anthony, our engineer, who will walk you through this process.
All right, so I'm going to go over on the bench here how to wire everything up, and then we'll go install it on the vehicle after that. But this will give you an overview of how all the connections need to be made and where each wire goes and how to hook up your devices to this control box. So if you open up this box, you'll see in here you have some extra fuses in your fuse pooler in the lid. And then you have 8 circuits on this box. There's 2 rated at 30 amps, 2 at 20 amps, 2 at 10 amps, and 2 at 5 amps. So you have to make sure whatever devices you connect to these circuits, it's not going to exceed what that circuit is rated for. And then these numbers down here, those correspond to the switch on the switch panel. So if you wire up a device to circuit number 1, on the switches, you'll see up in the top corner, there's a number on them. So circuit number 1 will correspond to this switch here. And same thing for all the rest of the circuits. All right, so you'll have a bundle of wires that come with your kit. These are going to be your battery wires to the circuit breaker and to this control panel. So we'll start with the ground. So take your long black ground wire. That's going to go up through this slot. This is where all your wires are going to run through. And you're going to mount one end of this to this negative terminal on your control box. And then once you get on the vehicle, the other end of this wire is going to go directly to your battery negative. All right, so your kit's going to come with 2 red battery cables. You're going to want to take the longer one, and that's going to go, again, up through this slot in the control box and then mount to this positive terminal. All right, just like that. Now, the other end of this longer red wire, that's going to connect to the circuit breaker. So take the cover off the circuit breaker, and then you have 2 studs here. So we're going to connect this battery wire onto one of these studs. All right, so you can take these rubber caps off the studs on the circuit breaker and take off the nut. And then this longer red wire coming from your control box, that'll mount to one of these studs. And then we'll tighten that down. And then on the other side, that's where you're going to mount the shorter red wire. And then the other end of the short red wire is going to mount directly to your battery positive terminal. And the way this circuit breaker works is you can open it by hitting this button, and that'll open the circuit, so no power will be going through here now. And this will also happen if the circuit trips. If you pull more than 60 amps, this will automatically trip, and then to reset it, you can just click that back down. So now we can put these rubber caps over top of our studs and put the cover back on. So next, this is your trigger wire. So this is what's going to turn on this panel when you turn on your vehicle. So if you connect this to an accessory source, so something that comes on when your key is in the on position, that'll only allow this to be used when you have your key on. If you want to be able to use this all the time, even when your vehicle is off, you can connect this to any 12-volt constant source. The downside to that is if you leave a light on, turn your vehicle off, you can drain your battery that way because it's not automatically going to shut off when you shut off the vehicle. So we recommend connecting this to an accessory source, something that comes on with the ignition. So the side with the plug will connect to this 2-pin labeled ACC on the control box. And then this one, like the other wires, you can just run out through this slot. And then this end, you can pull this insulation back, and this is what you're going to connect to your trigger source. All right, so next is the wire that will connect to your switch panel. So this is the wire that you'll run into the vehicle through the firewall, and you'll connect that to your switch panel once it's installed in the vehicle. So the side with this white plug, this will connect to your 4-pin connector spot on the control box, just like that. And then again, run this out through the slot. All right, so once you have this mounted in your engine bay and all of your devices are wired up to this box, then you'll run the other end of the wire we just connected into the vehicle, and that'll mount to the connector on your switch panel. All right, so once you have this run into the vehicle and you're ready to connect it, there's an arrow on each of these connectors. So you wanna line up the arrows and just push these two together. And then take this cap and screw it onto there. And that'll make that connection for you. All right, so now you're ready to make the connections for each one of your devices. So they will be connected to all these terminals here. So from each device, you're gonna connect your positive wire and your negative wire to one of these circuits. And just make sure that that circuit is rated for the amp draw that that device is going to have. Make sure the device isn't gonna exceed the circuit rating. All right, so any of our Borne Off-Road lighting products are gonna come with a universal harness for that light. So now I'm gonna show you how to modify that harness to set it up to use this as your switch for the light rather than the rocker switches that come with your kit. So here I have a universal lighting harness for our light bar. So each one of our universal harnesses comes with the switches to control the light, a relay, a fuse, and then the connector for the light itself. Since this 8-gang switch controller is gonna be taking the place of the switches, the relay, and the fuse, all we need is this leg that has the connector for the light. So you can take that and follow this all the way down to the relay, and you can cut it off there, and then we'll just use those connections to attach to our switch controller here. We have the leg of the connector, so we followed that all the way down to the relay, and now we're just gonna cut this off right at the relay. So I'm just gonna peel this insulation back a little bit so we can get down to the wires. All right, so now on this harness, you can see we have 4 wires. So your red and your black are gonna be your positive and negative wires going to the light. And then since this is a light bar, we also have the daytime running lights. So we have 2 wires for them. Your yellow wire is gonna control your amber colored lights, and your white wire is gonna control your white lights. So we'll show you how to hook these up to your switch controller later. But for now, we're gonna hook up the red and the black. We're gonna go to the positive and negative of circuit number 1, and we'll show you how to attach those. All right, so we'll start by stripping the insulation off the end of these power and ground wires. And like I said earlier, we recommend using a wire ferrule on the end of these before you connect into the terminals, so I'm gonna install them here. And then using these will ensure that you get a nice tight connection inside your terminals here. All right, so next I'm gonna do the same thing for the 2 wires for our DRLs. All right, so now to connect the harness to the terminals on here, we'll just loosen each of the screws for the circuit you're connecting to. All right, so now you can insert your wires from your device up through the slot in the control board. And then for whatever circuit you're planning to use, take your power wire and put it into the positive terminal. And then tighten that screw down to hold that in place. And then same thing for your ground wire, put that into the negative terminal on the circuit you're using. And tighten that down. All right, so now if you're using a light that has DRLs on it, you'll have 2 additional wires. One will be to control your amber light, and then one will be to control the white light. If you want, you can attach these to a different power source if you don't want to put them in through this, this control box. Or if you know you're only going to ever use amber, you can cap off the white light and just put this into a switch. But for this, just for demonstration purposes, I'll attach both of these to a circuit. So your DRL lights are just going to attach to the positive terminals of a circuit, and then they'll be grounded through the negative terminal of your main light bar circuit. All right, so now you're gonna repeat the same thing for any other devices that you're attaching to this. And once you have everything wired up, you can just reinstall this cover. And you'll be good to go. All right, so next up, we're gonna find a spot in the engine bay to mount this control box. So there's two options for mounting it. It comes with this bracket that you can use to mount it. You can mount this bracket to the vehicle and then mount the control box to this. Or you can mount the control box directly to the vehicle using these two holes on it. So if you use these two, you don't need to use this bracket. So we'll go get a spot in the vehicle now. All right, so when you're looking for a place to mount your control box in the engine bay, you want to try and avoid any high heat areas, so you don't want to mount it right by your exhaust headers or your catalytic converters. And you also want to make sure you're staying away from any moving parts and make sure that any wires aren't going to get caught up in anything. So I think I'm going to mount mine right next to this battery tray. So what I'm going to do is take this bracket and I'm just going to place the bracket where I want to put it and use that as a template. I'm going to have to drill one hole and then I'm going to reuse an existing hole that's already in the battery tray. So I'll just line up the bracket and use the marker to mark where I need to drill a hole. All right, so I'm going to use two of the larger bolts that came in the hardware pack to mount the bracket for the control box. So I'm going to insert these bolts in the back of the battery tray where I just drilled and then put a washer and a nut on the front, and then I'll use that to secure this bracket. All right, now I'm just going to insert this bracket onto these bolts. All right, next we're going to mount the control box onto this bracket, and then we'll do all of our wiring. So I'm going to use the two remaining large bolts and use them to attach this control box to the bracket. All right, so now that we have the control box mounted into the engine bay, I'm going to start connecting all of my circuits on the inside of the control box like we showed earlier. So for every electrical device that I'm going to hook up to this switch box, I'll connect each one of them to its own circuit. And then we'll finish up wiring the control box to the battery, and then we'll run the wire inside for the switch. All right, so now once you have all of your electrical devices hooked up to your control box, the next thing we're gonna do is connect this thin red wire. This is your trigger wire, and this is what's gonna turn on the control box. So we recommend attaching it to a source that comes on with your ignition. So that way this box can only be used when your ignition is on. Okay, so in my vehicle, I already have a fuse tapped in my fuse box that I know comes on with the ignition. So I'm gonna tap right into that. You can do the same on your vehicle, or you can find a wire that you know is an ignition source. Or if you want to be able to control this all the time, even when your ignition is not on, you can tap into any 12-volt source, and that'll power up this control box for you. All right, so the next step, you're going to connect the red wire from your circuit breaker to the battery. This goes right to the battery's positive terminal. All right, so next we'll connect the black ground wire from the control box to the battery's negative terminal. All right, so now that's all wired up to the battery. You can put the cover back on the control box. All right, so the next step, we'll run this wire from the control box into the vehicle, and this is what's gonna be what connects to our switch panel. All right, so next to run the wire for the switch inside the vehicle, I'm gonna take off this panel, and then there will be a hole in the firewall there that I can use to pull the wire in. There we go. All right, so now that we got that switch wire into the vehicle, we'll run the end of this over to wherever we want to mount our switches, and then we'll be able to hook that up to the switch panel. All right, so your kit comes with two different options to mount your switch panel. So there's this flat flush mount bracket. There's also this adjustable bracket. So both of these, they attach to screw holes on the back of the switch panel like this. So for the flush mount, you can attach it like that. Or for this adjustable mount, you can put the wire through there and attach your switch panel to that. The rest of the hardware that came in a bag, that can be used to attach the switch panel to whatever bracket you're using, and then attach that bracket to a mounting surface in the vehicle. Just make sure when you're attaching anything, if you're screwing in to any part of the vehicle, make sure there's no wires or hoses or anything behind where you're screwing into that you might accidentally puncture. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this adjustable mounting bracket. So I'll go how to mount the switch to the bracket, and then we'll go mount the bracket in the vehicle. All right, so first, to make things a little easier, I'm going to take this bracket apart so we can just mount one thing at a time. So this is the piece that you're going to mount to the switch controller. So, all right, so now I'm going to use 2 of these other screws to go mount the bottom half of that bracket into the vehicle, and then we'll reattach them together. All right, so now I'm going to run the wire for the switch panel over to the center of the vehicle where I'm going to mount my switches. All right, so now I'm gonna mount my switch panel down here in front of my shifter. So what I'll do is I'll pop this panel off and we can drill a hole to run the wire through. Then we can finish running this wire over to that location and then we can mount the bracket onto here. So this comes off just by pulling it. All right, so now I'm gonna keep running this wire over here and try and fish it through the back. All right, here it comes. Okay, so now that the wire is where I want it, I'm going to use the bracket for the switch panel that I'm going to use to mount to mark a template for the holes. So I'm going to have to drill one larger hole for the connector from the switch panel to go through, and then I'll mark where I want the screws to be, and I'll use the 2 screws from the hardware kit to mount the bracket onto here. All right, so I'm going to use this bracket as a template to mark where the screws are going to go, as well as where to drill the hole to put the wire through. All right, so to get the panel the rest of the way out, we have to make some room with the center console, so we just pull up to unclip this, and that'll let us slide this back far enough to get the panel out. All right, so now we'll go drill on our marks. All right, so first I'm gonna use a step drill bit to drill a hole big enough to get this connector from the switch panel through. Perfect. Now that we know that's big enough, we'll go ahead and mount the lower part of our bracket to this. Just like that. All right, so now that we have that panel on, we can go ahead and reattach the switch panel to it. So feed the wire through the hole we just drilled. And reattach this with the screws we took out earlier. And we'll leave those a little loose for now so we can adjust this once we get it into the vehicle. All right, so now we'll connect the switch panel to the wire that we have in from the control box in the engine bay. So just line up these connectors. There's 2 little arrows on them. So when the arrows are lined up, they'll be able to push together like this. And then just screw this cap on to secure it. Now I'm gonna pull this wire back through a little bit and then reattach my panel. So we have the panel reattached like that. Then we can just use zip ties to secure our wiring up out of the way. So now once we have this in a position that we like, we can finish tightening up these screws. Now we're ready to test it out, make sure it all works. All right, so now that we got the switch panel installed, we can turn the vehicle on and test it all out, and I can also go over the settings of how to set up the switch panel. So I'll just turn my ignition to on, and you can see the panel lights up. All right, so to change the color of the backlight, hold down the mode button and any other button until a red light appears up here. So I'll press these, and now that there's a red light, you can use either of these 2 buttons to cycle through the colors. So if you hold this down, the colors will change. And then if you hold this one, it'll go in the opposite direction. So once you find a color that you like, you can press the mode button again to save. All right, so all 8 of these switches can be set to 3 different modes. So you have your toggle mode, which is just on off. You have a momentary mode, which you have to press and hold the button to use the device, and then you have a pulse mode. So if you press this, your light will strobe. So to set the function of each switch, you can double click the mode button until all the lights are flashing. Red means that it's a toggle on-off switch. If you want to change it to momentary, press the button, it'll change to blue. That indicates that it's a momentary switch. Or if you want it to be pulse, press it again, and green indicates that it'll be pulsing. So once you made your selections, you can press the mode button again, and that'll save the changes. So now for this switch, it'll just be on-off. This one, I have to press and hold for the light to be on, and then this one will make the light strobe when I press it. All right, so the last thing to do is label all your switches. So we include 100 different labels in the kit. So just find the label that matches what device you're controlling and attach that to your switch. And then for the 2 circuits that we don't have anything connected to right now, we'll just put a blank switch label on there until we get some more lightings to attach to those circuits. Okay, so that was the overview of the installation of our universal 8-gang switch. To check out all of our products that you can control with this switch, check out our website at borne.com and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all of our future installation videos.